Greetings, my name is Bert, and welcome back to the Age of the Classics, where I read through several startling and mysterious books. Today, we're reading through Meet Madeline, an American Girl story. Madeline is a spunky, sprightly colonial girl full of energy and independence. Let us begin. Chapter 1, Merriman's Store. Madeline Merriman pushed open the door to her father's store and took a deep breath. Madeline loved the smell of coffee beans and chocolate, pine soap, spiced tea, and apples. No other place in the world smelled as good as her father's store. "Good day, Mistress Madeline," said her father. He smiled and bowed. Madeline grinned. Her father always pretended she was a fine lady customer when she came to his store. "Good day, Mr. Merriman," she answered. She liked to pretend too. "That's a lovely hat you're wearing, young miss. Have you come to buy a new feather for it?" said Mr. Merriman. "Or perhaps you'd like some new ribbon or straw flowers." "Oh, father, you know I don't fancy this old hat at all," giggled Madeline. "I wear it only because mother insists." Madeline pushed the straw hat off her head so that it hung down her back. "Aye," agreed her father. "It's supposed to shade your face so that the sun doesn't make your nose red." Madeline rubbed her nose. It was rather pink. "I do forget to wear my hat sometimes," Madeline said. Mr. Merriman smiled. "Sometimes you forget, and sometimes you are in too much of a hurry. I know, my impatient girl, but don't fret. I think your nose is very pretty indeed." He tapped Madeline's nose with the tip of his finger. "And now tell me, what did your mother send you to fetch today?" Madeline stood very tall and pretended to be a fine lady again. "A penny's worth of ginger root, if you please, sir." Her father bowed. "Yes, madam, ginger it is," he said, "and there's a bit of rock candy for your trouble." "Thank you, father," said Felicity. She popped the candy in her mouth and tasted its sharp sweetness. While her father weighed the ginger root and wrapped it in newspaper, Madeline looked around the store. The shelves were crowded with bolts of cloth, bowls, bottles, kettles, and coffee pots. Fat-bellied sacks of rice, flour, and salt leaned against barrels of nails. Everywhere Madeline looked, she saw something useful or pleasing. There were aprons, nightcaps, combs, spices, sponges, rakes, fishing hooks, tin whistles, and books. Madeline loved to daydream about the faraway places everything came from. The tulip bulbs came from Holland, the tea from China, and the cotton from India. Madeline believed her father's store was the finest store in Williamsburg, and probably the finest store in all of the 13 colonies. The King of England himself didn't go to a better shop in London, Madeline was sure. Mr. Merriman handed Madeline a neatly packed packet. "Here's your ginger, Madeline," he said. "Put it safe in your pocket, and you won't lose it on the way like you lost the sugar last week." Madeline put the ginger deep in her pocket. "I didn't quite lose the sugar, father," she said. "I gave it away." "To a horse," laughed Mr. Merriman. "Oh, yes, now I remember." He winked at his daughter. "I believe you'd give a horse anything. You do love horses, don't you, Maddie?" "Aye," said Felicity, nodding happily. Mr. Merriman patted Madeline's pocket. "Mind you, don't give this ginger to any horse or I'll be very disappointed. I'm hoping it's meant for a cake to go with my supper this evening. Hurry along home now so you can help bake my ginger cake." "Oh, must I go home, father?" asked Madeline. Baking a ginger cake at home was not as interesting as helping in the store. Madeline loved to greet customers. Sometimes father let her help them choose buttons and ribbons to buy. Sometimes she helped Marcus count the boxes and barrels of goods that came in on the ships from England. "May I stay here for just a little while?" Madeline asked. "May I help Marcus in the storeroom?" "No, Maddie, you needn't stay," said Mr. Merriman. "Have you forgotten? Ben helps Marcus in the storeroom now." "Humph," thought Madeline. "Ben is so quiet and shy. 'Tis easy to forget him." Ben was the new apprentice. Father was teaching him how to run a store. Ben had come to live with the Merrimans 1 month ago. He slept in the loft above the stable and mostly kept to himself. Ever since Ben had come, Mr. Merriman did not need Madeline's help in the store at all. Madeline sighed. She knew there should be helping. At home, a pile of mending was waiting for her there, but Madeline hated the idea of sitting straight and still, stitching tiny stitches, when all the while she was stiff with boredom. She would much rather stay at the store, but her father had already turned back to his work. There was nothing to do but go home. Madeline was in luck, though. Just as she opened the door to go out, a stout, well-dressed lady sailed in. The lady's hat was decorated with ribbons and feathers that fluttered like leaves in a breeze. Madeline stepped back and held the door open wide. "Mrs. Fidget," said Mr. Merriman happily. "What a pleasure! I haven't seen you since summer began. You look well." Thank you, sir," said the lady cheerily. "You're looking well yourself." She nodded toward Madeline. "And who is this pretty maid?" she asked. "It's not your little Maddie, is it?" Maddie smiled as her father answered, "Indeed it is, Felicity, or Madeline." Well, Mrs. Fidget gasped as if she were surprised. "The dear girl, grown so tall and pretty, hair as bright as a marigold. I'm sure she'll have the lads flocking about Mr. Merriman." Mrs. Fidget turned to Madeline. "Are you ready for the lads to come a-courting, Miss Madeline? Are you working on your sampler of stitches to show them how well you sew?" "No, ma'am," said Madeline. "I've not begun a sampler as yet." "Not yet?" Mrs. Fidget asked. "Why, my 2 girls have finished their samplers when they were your age." "My Maddie's not much one for stitching," said Mr. Merriman. "She hasn't the patience." "High-spirited, is she?" said Mrs. Fidget. Well, Mr. Merriman, your girl will find her patience when she goes looking for a armchair. Wait till she meets a fellow she fancies. She'll settle down right fast enough." "Maddie is far more interested in horses than fellows," smiled Mr. Merriman. "She'd rather go for a horseback ride than go to a fancy dress ball." He looked at Madeline. "Isn't that true, Maddie, my girl?" "Of course, father," said Madeline. She did not believe anyone could prefer dancing to riding horses. "Horses!" exclaimed Mrs. Fidget. "That reminds me why I came to your store today. I want to order oats for your horses today to eat. Will you have your man bring a sack of oats round to my house, Mr. Merriman?" "I'll have my new apprentice do it," said Mr. Merriman. "Ben is going to deliver a new bit and harness to Jiggy and I at the tannery this afternoon. He will bring the oats to your house on his way." "Very well," said Mrs. Fidget. She lowered her voice to a gossipy tone. "I know why that good-for-nothing Jiggy Nye wants a new harness and bit. I hear he's got himself a new workhorse. Wanted gambling or something such thing. In any case, he didn't pay for it, mind you." Maddie listened closely. She wanted to hear more about Mr. Nye's new horse, but Mrs. Fidget frowned and said, "I believe he worked his old horse to death. That man is a cold-hearted scoundrel. He's not to be trusted. You better tell Bean to be sure Jiggy pays for that harness right away." "That I will," agreed Mr. Merriman. "I'll take no promises for payment from Jiggy. His money would be drunk up before I'd see it." Mr. Merriman glanced at Maddie and stopped talking. But Maddie knew all about Mr. Nye. Everyone knew he drank too much rum. When he did, he went into rages and left his work undone. His house was always a mess, and his fences were always falling down. Maddie didn't dislike him for any of those reasons. She hated Mr. Nye because he killed poor cows and horses that were too old to work anymore and made leather from their hides. "What's Mr. Nye going to do with his new horse? He's not going to work it to death, is he, Father?" asked Madeline. "Don't you worry about Jiggy Nye's new horse," said Mr. Merriman. "I'm sure it's strong and healthy. Jiggy Nye would be foolish to mistreat it." He kissed Maddie on the forehead. "Now, run along home. Your mother will be wondering what's become of you and that ginger. Goodbye, my child." "Goodbye, Father. Good day, Miss Fidget," said Madeline. "Farewell, Miss Felicity," said Mrs. Fidget. Madeline stepped into the bright afternoon. She walked home thinking only one thing. Mr. Nye has a new horse and I'm going to see it, somehow, as soon as I can. Join us next week as we explore Chapter 2,